by yourself.
Okay.
Yes, please. I got the instructions about the sequence of
Thought I was gonna be last.
thing.
I thought they were going to save the best to last, of course.
I do apologize.
Not a problem. Not a problem
But,
at all.
okay, and if you'd like.
That's my field.
Okay. No, with Siemens. No, so no,
The best.
The best. Yes, you're by implication, of course. Yes. Okay. Okay. Over to you, and if you'd like to sit down here,
All right.
then you can see better.
Yes. Are we going to load the Six Sigma presentation? Is there good? Yes. Okay. Actually, I was. This is good as well because we now know what AIS is. You're going to have the specifics from these people. When we came up with the idea for AIS, it was on the 4th of October of 2001, and after being told by the Coast Guard when I suggested it to them that I was crazy, I knew I wasn't because I knew I had spent some time in classified endeavors and on our president's airplane working on how to isolate signals in a dense signal environment, and I literally couldn't write the math, but I knew guys that could. But I needed an antenna, and so I went to Google on the afternoon of 4 October and typed in VHF antenna satellite, and there was only one company, and that was Orbcom. And you'll hear from them later on. But had a long chat with them after being told that I needed to sign an NDA, and kept telling them I wasn't going to because I needed it for research, and I wasn't going to because I was going to need to tell people about it. They finally agreed that if they would build my satellite, if I would find the money, and I spent almost 3 years finding the money, being told about 85% of the time I was crazy. But we finally got to $6.4 million to build a satellite, but Orbcom went ahead and built 6 satellites for me because they were already building 6 satellites, and they just put copies of the VHF system in each of them. But in doing that, we made this announcement. 10 different organizations from 6 different nations approached me. And Tortler, were you one of the people that came from FFI back in 2004? Yeah, I know you came in 2005, but somebody came and visited me in late 2004. You came, we had that first joint meeting. We called it the Technical Exchange on AIS via Satellite. And Norway, Canada, McDonnell Detweiler, and the Canadian government. I believe KSAT was there, FFI was there, DLR was there, the Japanese Coast Guard was there, as well as NRL, Orbcom, and the U.S. Coast Guard. And about 6 or 7 months later, the Coast Guard came to me and said, "That was really a great meeting. Would you do that again?" And the second one we did officially called Texas. We've now held 14 meetings all over the world to discuss how you collaborate in space for international global maritime awareness. And that's what C Sigma stands for. It is not C small SIGMA, it's C SIGMA. It's an acronym. And one of the things that we originally talked about immediately was how all the different other people, because people were coming to me, the Canadians, the Italians, that's the other one I missed. The Italians and the Germans all came to me and said, "We're getting ready to build really great SAR satellites that are really going to work with you guys. Would you collaborate with me?" And I thought, geez, we've got 6 nations here, plus the United States, that's 7. We could build 7 good systems or 1 great one. And that's what C Sigma stands for. I actually have a signature from a guy named Barack Obama just before the economy of the America fell on its face back in 2010. It actually was already going down by that point, but we were never able to get money. But Barack Obama signed it, and I will show you what he wrote to me, not to me, to the government of the United States. But I wrote it for him, but he signed it. Collaboration in space for international global maritime awareness. It is the pathway, I believe, to how we work together to improve the economy of the United States, I am an American, I'm proud of that, but I mean of the world. Environmental protection, add to maritime safety, resource confidence. Our fishing people yesterday and the mining, had a gentleman last night tell me that he had written his doctorate on on global ocean deep mining just before the Glomar Explorer was discovered to be a CIA cover plan. And when it was discovered, he lost his job. And, of course, security, which is what we do. System description. I wrote this first description in about 2005. First time I briefed it was early in 2006. 6 integrated elements, 4 in space, 2 on the ground. The 4 space, SAR radar, absolutely. Second were the optical systems. I originally thought the optical would do it, but then, as I mentioned, Canada, Germany, Italy, and Japan all have optical systems, as did the European Space Agency. When they started telling me about how a SAR could work and how good it was, I said, geez, we need to include that. That's the queen of the skies. It's also the most expensive part up there. Your optical systems, we all know about now. M to M, machine to machine. There are so many sensors out there, millions of them today. A lot of them talk to satellites. MRSAT satellite, Orbcom, that's actually Orbcom's main line of business. Satellite AIS is just a little side business for them. They give you pressure on dams, pressure on bridges, pressures on fuel tanks, pressures on pipelines, that if you, out in the middle of the desert somewhere or a forest somewhere, you've got a pipeline switch that says, pardon me, I got a problem. Do you have a sensor problem, or do you really have a problem? Planet, and I've talked to them, the idea that they're taking pictures of coast now, I know where they got that idea. My wife sleeps with that guy, and I'm still looking for him. He's got a gun. But anyway, the idea of tying in optical systems and SAR systems with M2M for maritime domain awareness is what I first had, and then I started thinking about it works on the land too. You guys all know this, everybody that's here, but I've put this up for other people. But it is the key concept. Satellite AIS is what makes maritime domain awareness it's from space operational, possible, feasible. Ground components. People touched on this earlier today too. You need to have the tools to task the satellite, when to use it. That's one of the beauties of AIS. It gives you the pattern of life on the world's oceans. You study that, and then you look what's unusual. That's where you take pictures of it. That's what Global Fishing Watch is doing. That was my point yesterday when I asked the guy the question. You can subtract one from the other, and there's all these other problems you can attack as well. And I believe one watch center could do it all. Finally, the last one is how do you make information? How do you make your satellites pick up? There's phenomenologies that all entities give off. Satellites pick them up. They make data. You process it to get information. You take that from knowledge, and hopefully, when you study it for a while, you get wisdom. The wisdom is where to take your satellites and where to operate them, where to take pictures. The story I like to tell is that when the first guy that bought satellite AIS, does anybody know who was the first guy that actually purchased commercial satellite AIS? It's a man a lot of us know. If you live in New York City, you absolutely know his name. That's a hint. Wasn't Trump. It was a competitor, Mike Bloomberg. Michael Bloomberg came to Orbcom, one of the first people, and said, I'd like to buy yours, and I don't want you to tell anybody I'm doing this, because he took the shipping records and the information that satellite AIS was giving. He now knew wherever commodity in the world was within a few miles of within a few hours, often within an hour of when it was going to be at whatever port. And so he was able to adjust the commodity prices of the world accordingly. And for the first 2 years, he made about $1 billion a year off my invention. Do you have any idea how much money I made off that? I didn't even get a kiss on the cheek or a handshake or my picture taken with him. But he made $2 billion off that. That's, I guess, why he's a multi-billionaire. And I still drive a used car. Our national space policy, 28 June 2010. I spent 9 months politicking inside D.C., visiting all these different agencies and saying, please sign it, please support me. and we actually have a signature from Barack Obama. It's in Presidential Policy Direction 4, our national space policy, which is still in effect today. It says build this. They've never done it. It's a little bit frustrating, but that's life. We looked at all of these things. If we all collaborated, and I believe the United States should take that leadership role and work to do it, but they appear not to be interested in doing that anymore, the world would be better off for it. And that's it.
Thank you very much.
By the way, somebody said that they had 35 years. Into this month, I go over my 60th year in the maritime domain.
Oh.
I joined the Sea Scouts then.
So we'll not have a competition on this one. Thank you very much. Okay. So over to you, George. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good morning. It is good to be here. I've been to all four. And I would suggest that last night for dinner we had more people than we had in the first meeting. But it's been an interesting road. And I'm going to start by saying something that has to do with the whole world of satellite AIS. 2018 is the year we celebrate 10 years after the launch of the first commercial satellites back in 2008. And it's been quite the road. From those little dots that we saw on those first maps back in 2008, this room, among many others, has developed an incredible industry around the capture of AIS information. And you should look at every one of you and thank yourself that you did that. Congratulations. I believe that. Now let me give you the propaganda from Orbcom. It's very interesting. Orbcom is actually primarily in the M2M, which has suddenly been converted into the information of things. Now the question you get from most people is, what the hell are things? Well, anything. Any device that can be monitored, Orbcom can monitor it. It runs from water measurements. If you go to Australia, they're very worried about water. So every water system in Australia is monitored daily. They used to send information manually via telex, via fax. Now they use satellites to do it. And Orbcom doesn't actually do that one, but it's a similar application. We, at the moment, are ranked #1 in the base of M2M services. We use 3 global satellite networks besides our own. It's smart. And as we go forward, Orbcom will use more. We use cellular networks. In Europe, it's interesting. They don't think they have any space where you should use satellites, and it's fundamentally true, so you have lots of cellular networks. But in North America, there's lots of places where you have no cellular network, so you have to use satellites. Same in places like Russia, etc. We have 2.1 million subscribers that subscribe to M2M. Now, to give you some idea of Orbcom's success, when I started in 2010 with this company, they were approximately a $30 million revenue a year corporation. This year, through acquisition, that's a significant growth. With that growth, we've had success. We've also had a few challenges. But we'll leave those for another presentation. Current Orbcom business profile. We do comprehensive satellite and third-party terrestrial services from a variety of sources. And while we mentioned in the M2M we use 3 different satellite services, we also look for others in terms of AIS. And there is opportunity there to look at that. We, as a supplier, are a raw data supplier. We We do no added value to the services that we supply in AIS. People come to us, and we provide most of the commercial resellers and distributors for AIS around the world, and it's proved to be very successful. And we made a decision that we never compete with our partners. In fact, we have a number of governments around the world, and none of those contracts are directly with Orbcom. They're with our resellers and partners. And we have hundreds of active AIS licenses. We license the service. Let's look at future development, because that's what it's all about. We currently have, I think it's 13, what we call OG2, and all that stands for is Orbcom Generation 2 satellites. And these satellites were launched first in July of 2014 and then in December of 2015, and they're operating. We also have 2 dedicated polar satellites, which gives us coverage of the poles. Now, despite all the noise you've read about the wonderful service of ships going through the Arctic, most shipping companies still are not willing to take the risk. There still is ice up there, no matter what you think. And it really doesn't go well with ships, it turns out. There was some ship doing a trip across the Atlantic in about 1912, and it discovered the real relationship between ice and ships doesn't go very well. We are looking at hosting payloads on third-party people, and you heard from John just now about that, because there's a company that is going to put up satellites, and they're going to put AIS up there. So we tend to look at companies like that and say, okay, is there a benefit to join? We also are looking at our own OG3 satellite, in other words, putting new satellites up. We also are looking at the whole concept of the CSAT, is that worth doing, etc. The issue in those areas, they're small, what is their life? The satellites we put up tend to last for about 13 years. Although we have discovered a few do not last for 13 years. In fact, it's hard to get them to last for 12 months. But somehow we still survive. There's been an issue with AIS. AIS was originally developed for collision avoidance, and it was developed in 1980. And I want to show you something in your mind. In 1986, the first cell phones came in, and I had one in my car. It cost about $9,000, took up the whole trunk, and I could actually call 5 people. It was really modern, very well developed. In that time, since 87, we have evolved a technology that is unbelievable. And at your fingertips, you have computers, not phones, you have computers, can do anything, put you in touch with anywhere, and allow you to do just about anything you want. Yet here we are in 2018, and we're still using a service called AIS that was developed with the technology in 1980. Think about that. Think about that. So, what has happened? Well, a recent report by IALA, along with IMO, suggested that there is congestion. We know there's congestion in space, but they're finding that now there's congestion in terrestrial AIS. Why? Well, in 1980, people didn't have a lot of money. They didn't rush out and buy ships. Nations such as China, India, and Brazil were not developed. They didn't have a middle class. Well, guess what? They now do. There's lots of vessels out there. They all want to put AIS on, and it's beginning to show stress. So we came up with one option. This is Orbcom's option. We have M2M. In that M2M, we have 2 frequencies that belong to Orbcom. I want you to understand that. They belong to Orbcom. They're proprietary. Today, if you went to the ITU, you could not do that. But in 1990, they could. So what they decided to do is, let's take a look at that. Can we put the AIS information into the M2M signal? Yes, we can. So we developed this product, the MT5000 Halley, which has Class B, but it also has M2M. Now, M2M is a 2-way transmission. As John Alan correctly pointed out, when you have AIS, it's a passive service. It's like your radio at home. If someone transmits something, you get it. That's how AIS works. If someone transmits it, you get it. If they don't transmit it, you get nothing. With M2M, it's a two-way transmission. We can transmit from the vessel, and we can receive the information on the vessel. So that's what this Halley device is. It's our concept of the future. How many do we have? Well, we're still in trials and we're still working with it. But it looks good. And finally, you look at Orbcom. We have advantages. We've been around. We're established. Orbcom is a satellite service provider, and we provide good service, and we make sure it works. And we've done very well at it, and we've done very well with AIS. And thanks to you in this room, we continue to do well. And I want to thank you for that, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, George. It's interesting how you go back to the past with what. How many of you do not know what telex is? Okay. Oh, thank you. At least one. Thank you. I'm sure there are a few more that really don't, or have at least never used the service. Actually, I learned programming at. I used a telex device for keying in my first computer programs. So. Algo 60. But also you are very much forward-looking to the M2M services and everything ahead. Thank you for opening up this wide band. Let's move over. We are also, of course, late with our timing, as usual. I do apologize. Over to David. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. And again, thanks to Karsten and the rest of the Seadevcon committee for inviting us to be here. It's my third AIS Summit, but that's mainly because I'm quite a bit younger than George. So I'm a little bit late to that, buddy. But anyway, it's good to see everyone here. And I guess in the room here, we're all AIS colleagues. And that's what the purpose of this summit is to be colleagues and to learn more about AIS-related technologies and how we collectively as individuals and as well as our respective companies can learn more how to exploit that to our mutual advantage going forward. So I think I want to spend less time today on futures, and I want to talk about today, because that's what we're here all about, is about what is available in the marketplace today. And I wanted to just have a few slides. I don't have many, so I think we can go through that very quickly. I think most people here in this room know who we are. Very similar to Orbcom. ExactEarth was also an early pioneer in satellite AIS. In fact, we were the second to market with a commercial service, and we will be celebrating our 10th year in just several months' time as well. So funny how these things all come together. But ExactEarth is a Canadian data services company that was spun out of a space hardware manufacturer called ComDev. It was spun off as a data services business back in 2009. And conducted some technical development experiments, and actually George was part of that team at the time as well. And we also launched our satellite AIS capability in July of 2010 with just several satellites that kind of offer the service. And to George's point, I remember that time when we first launched our NTS-1 satellite, which was an experimental satellite to test the feasibility of whether we can receive these signals in space. And, like a kid in a candy store, I know it's like a term you use here in Europe, I was so excited when our NTS satellite captured 90 seconds worth of data and plotted about 60 ship positions on a map. We looked at that map and said, boy, that's the greatest thing we've ever seen. And it's amazing that here we are 10 years later, and it's almost boring. Well, not really. It's still quite exciting, but I mean, we're seeing just hundreds of thousands of ship positions around the world, and we're all here to just celebrate all that together as an accomplishment. So I echo George in congratulating all of us for making this happen. So anyway, ExactEarth has launched its first generation service in July of 2010. And since that time, we've captured a large customer base. Over 100 government customer agencies around the world actively use our service today, and a very largely fast-growing commercial sector as well, several hundred customers and new partners that are coming on board all the time. But I think the most exciting thing to talk about is our second generation system, which is just now nearing completion in terms of launch capabilities. And I'll focus on that on the next several slides. Back in May of 2015, I believe, we announced our second generation system in partnership with Iridium and Harris, and kind of got a little bit later getting off the ground, but it's pretty much already there in terms of the capabilities. So just to kind of give you a little bit of an orbital comparison between the two services. On the left-hand side, is it the red button I press to get the little, yeah, I always mix these up when I come to these. So on the left-hand side was kind of what our first generation system looked like. Data from our own ComDev built satellites, as well as data licensed from other providers at that time. And the design of our Generation 1 system was going to provide a general update rate of about 45 minutes on a global average basis, with data delivered in roughly 30 minutes or less. That was the target of what the first generation system was. And while most of our customers were satisfied with that level of performance, of course, when you set the standard for a capability, customers always want us to do more. So it's never good enough to have what you have now. It's always got to be better. So working with Iridium and Harris, we've partnered with them, and we launched or announced our ExactView RT system back in 2015. And the design of that system has over 65 satellites that will provide coverage of 1 minute or less anywhere around the world, with data being delivered to you in also less than 1 minute. In cases and I'll talk about that a little bit later, we're seeing data latency down to 15 seconds. We now currently have 54 satellites in orbit, and I've lost track of how many are actually spitting data in a production setting, but it's somewhere about 45 plus as of this morning. So again, one of the values of having the second generation system hosted aboard Iridium Next is that it's basically a telephone system. And when you're aboard a telephone system, means you can rely on all of the comms infrastructure that exists between the satellites themselves and their ground network to be able to receive updated position reports very rapidly. It's impossible to do unless you have a system such as this. So that was one of the reasons we made the decision to invest in this capability, working in concert with Iridium as well as with Harris to get that capability implemented and brought out to the market. So in terms of some of the attributes of this, and again, there's lots of words on the slide, so I will ensure I don't talk about all of them. But the real key from our customers, from a customer perspective, is to understand the reliability aspect of it. It is a telecom infrastructure system, so it's designed to be ever on all the time, 24/7. It's also very precise, because the Iridium Next system has to be in very precise orbits, guided by their own propulsion systems to ensure they stay in their orbits, to deliver the proper time gaps, to ensure that you never lose any sort of service coverage with the phones, and side benefit AIS and other services as well. And of course, the innovation behind it was because one of the designs of these payloads was to be completely reprogrammable from the ground. So much like other providers here, the payloads are completely reprogrammable from the ground, and the payloads that we are on are designed to listen to any frequency in the maritime VHF band. So it's not limited to just the AIS capability. There's other innovations along the way that will future-proof this constellation for a long time. So what does this really mean for the customer? Right? At the end of the day, that's why we do these things. Well, first of all, it provides a very rapid update rate. Right? There's always at least one or more satellites at any one point in the globe at any one point in time, capturing information from vessel traffic, using the traditional, of course, AIS frequencies for which most of the traffic continues to broadcast on, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But also the data latency, which I made reference to just a few moments ago. Again, because of the telecom nature of the infrastructure that's hosted aboard Iridium Next, we are receiving position reports within seconds. We talk about 1 minute or less, but in some cases, even yesterday at SMM where we're exhibiting, we were seeing position reports 12 seconds after capture from the satellite constellation. And these vessels were far south in the Southern Ocean. So very impressive to see these types of latencies. And we're getting that everywhere around the globe. But also from a detection capability, some of you know the type of processing that we have always done on the ground with our Gen 1 system, which used some very sophisticated signal processing algorithms to be able to decode the AIS transmissions from a massive noise that we pick up in the VHF spectrum. We've been able to port a lot of that up into the constellation, so we have no more ground processing capability. It's all done in orbit using the same capabilities that we've always had, and as a result gives us a very high detection rate of vessels even in the densely congested areas. That all said, we all know that AIS itself was never designed for space reception. And no amount of physics in the world can solve the problem when you have thousands upon thousands of overlapping signals in areas such as the Mediterranean, the South China Sea, and what have you. We all know this. I think to say otherwise would be foolish and irresponsible. However, as I think Alfred was talking about earlier in his presentation, this was one of the reasons Message 27 was brought into the standards several years ago, was to help avoid that particular problem, where you can at least ensure greater probability of detection by vessels broadcasting this short burst, short length position report over different AIS channels, which are AIS channels 3 and 4. All of these payloads on the Iridium NEXT constellation are able to receive those, and we are picking these up as fastly and as reliably as the Message 1 and 2, and therefore ships that were previously quite dark to AIS, especially when you're traveling through the South China Sea, now have track fidelity as good as anything you see on 1 and 2. So that's a real innovation that our customers are very excited about. And we don't stop there. I know Torkild was talking about VDES earlier, and on the VDES channels, I think these are AIS 5 and 6, and other frequencies coming forward, we're also able to start collecting messages on those frequencies from anything from small vessel tracking or anything else that's being broadcast on some of those VDES experimental channels at this point. We're also able to collect those quite reliably up in orbit. So from our customer's perspective, one of the things that exactEarth has always committed itself to do was trying to ensure that we can meet what our customers are looking for, which is reliability, which is detection, and as well as future-proofing, because we all know the future is going to change. We don't know what those changes will be it AIS or be it what have you, but as long as we as your partner can be there to work with you to help work through these changes and standards is what we are really committed to helping our customers and partners work through going forward. So that's just a very brief synopsis with respect to the ExactView RT system. In the interest of time, I just kind of put up a usual global snapshot of ships that we've captured. 90% of the ships that you see on your screen were captured within 10 minutes or less on our system with the RT system, which is still not quite finished its deployment, and we'll complete that toward the end of 2018. We've been very busy at the SMM event. For those of you who we met over there, we gave you some demonstrations in terms of the rapid update rates, the low latency, as well as the ship's broadcasting Message 27, and certainly would be happy to give you some additional demonstrations a little bit later. So at this point, I just wanted to conclude by saying thank you once again for having us, and we look forward to continuing the debate with our colleagues today.
Thank you very much. Very condensed, very compact information. Thank you very much indeed. And it's good to see two of the main providers of these services sitting by each other, and we'll come to the discussion later about these topics. Yeah, I'm sure. Don't need to tell. I was just trying to be. Okay. Okay. Let's move over to Simon for his final presentation, and then we'll have a discussion about this and go outside. Yeah.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Simon van der Ries. I feel very humble here with so much experience in this industry, particularly because I'm relatively new to Spire, about 6 weeks. Having said that, I have about 25 years of experience in the satellite communications business, as well as in the maritime business. So I'm very pleased, and I can imagine all the work that Guy has done, and George and David. I mean, it's really amazing what you guys have done. So I'm very humble and pleased as well to be part of this party. And I think Jürgen wrote somewhere that we are the new kid on the block, which is partially true. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the history of Spire is, where we are today. I only have 2 slides. Karsten told me to be very, very, very brief. So Spire started in 2012. You guys were already along the way at that time. And since then, we founded in San Francisco. We raised around $175 million to build a constellation of nanosatellites. Nanosatellites are CubeSats. They are not bigger than this size, so even smaller than the bar fridge. The uniqueness of Spire is the fact that we have designed the satellites, we build them, and we operate them. So we are designing and building those satellites currently in Glasgow, Scotland, and we produce around 2 to 4 satellites a month. Besides the design, the building, and the operation of the constellation network, which we are doing today with around 28 ground station network globally, we are also doing the other side of the business, which is mining the data, collecting the data, refining the data, and actually building an attractive and easy accessible maritime data reservoir. So right now we are at 61 satellites. We have 28 additional satellites booked for launch for the next 6 months. We are expanding the ground stations from 28 to something like 35. Final objective is to have a constellation around 135 on average. And these nanosatellites, of course, have a much shorter life than from the colleagues. Average life expectancy is around 4 to 5 years. However, the first satellites is still up and running since 6 years. We actually have 4 businesses. We have the maritime business, which we call the SENSE, which is our AIS. So all our 61 satellites today have an AIS receiver on all 4 channels. We have the ADS-B, which is the aircraft. We have currently around 4 satellites that are doing ADS-B. And the third business is what we call the weather business, the Stratos business. And that is probably the initial and also final goal for Spire. And that is probably also where we will make the biggest difference. Maybe even we have a maritime or a weather conference in 10 years' time, we said we were at the beginning. Because we're doing something completely revolutionary there. The way we do that is that we do radio occultation and radio reflection of GPS or GNSS signals, so the Beidou, the GLONASS, the Galileo, and the way they travel through the atmosphere, the variation of that gives an indication about temperature, humidity, and pressure. And we also measure the reflection of these GNSS signals on the Earth, on the ocean. That gives us very precise weather information, which is particularly valid over oceans, for vessels, as well for aircrafts. So the fourth business pillar is what we call space as a service. You can imagine with this amount of experience of designing, building, and operating satellites, cube satellites, there's a lot of experience in that people come to us as well to say, okay, can we have our own nanosatellite? Can we have a payload in there? That's, I would say, a fourth business pillar. We have started with AIS. Maybe because it's the most easy. It's probably the most mature market at this stage. Of course, we are late to the game, and I think we have now come to a maturity, commercial maturity as well, that we are ready to further commercialize this service. We have done this from the very beginning, but to be honest, I think it's only very recently that we have a quality of data that is comparable and that is usable for people here in the room and for many other users that we are doing. So that's basically what we're doing. We are, as I said, on the commercial side, we are relatively in the beginnings. We are currently 175 people. At the end of last year, the Luxembourgish government invested around 60 million in Spire, which made us to move the global headquarters from San Francisco to Luxembourg. So I'm based in Luxembourg as well. And from there, we will have their general management, product management, and our roadmap on there. So that's the brief summary of what we are doing with Spire, and I'm very much honored again to be here and to work with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and it's good to hear that there's something new also coming up, and that it's not a saturated market as such, or at least you conceive it as not yet saturated, and therefore as a business opportunity, but also then, of course, as an application opportunity, because you need to set yourself apart. Can I ask the 4 of you to join me on the podium for a while? Yes. I'm prepared for that. Okay. Carsten, do we have any anonymous questions?
There is one question, and maybe it's a good question for Simon. There's one person asking, with thermal imaging. So is this on your list, doing thermal images, or maybe?
No, it's not foreseen to do thermal imaging on our Spire satellites. Of course, we know the nano satellites industry pretty well, and we tend to cooperate a lot with other nano satellite operators. We work with other SAR image operators. Haven't spoken to Capella Space yet, but obviously we see the synergies in there. So we will not do that. That's not on our roadmap, but we would like to cooperate.
And then there is another question for you. The question is ground stations. Why do you need one?
Why do you need it? To bring the messages down from the satellite to the ground. What is special, I think, about Spire is that we have decided to do it all in-house, which is quite an operation. I mean, lots of other people actually, that you can go to other people to use the other ground workstations. This is all built with S-band download, but you need it. And the more ground stations you have, the faster you can get things down.
Although, of course,
some more, but maybe you start with the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's an interesting question in as such that I think that is one of your specialities that you are doing. Of course, you need a ground station because very few vessels, ships are using the orbit, so they are on ground. However, but you do the processing of your the data in space, don't you?
Yeah, I think I.
That's okay.
Yeah, it's on. Okay, so yes, thank you, Jürgen. I think there might have been a couple of questions there, so I'll just try to answer that as best I can. So in our first generation system, we did almost all processing and decoding of the signals on the ground. We had a great big cluster data center that just had hundreds and hundreds of parallel processing cores to detangle signals and everything else. While it gave us good performance, the downside of that was that, and as we talk about ground stations and processing, it just added significantly to the data latency. So sometimes a customer would receive the data 2 hours after the position report was captured. So that, that's kind of an old way of doing certain things. So one of the things we wanted to do with our second generation system when we were first looking at what requirements and what we needed to do, we found the ideal partner with both Iridium and Harris, in the sense that we can leverage an infrastructure that is designed for very, very fast reception. You can't beat a telephone system. So the Iridium Next constellation, much like other SATCOM services, I would presume, all have interlinking capabilities within the spacecrafts. So you're able to also have some capacity for processing and detangling the signals on board the spacecraft. And then once you've got the position reports, you're able to actually relay them through the satellites to downlink it to the nearest ground station. And Iridium, I think, only have 2 ground stations to do all of that very, very rapidly. So it's a very different way of looking at it. In fact, we had to convert some of our own thinking as to how we'd be able to do it. But that said, we also still have some ground processing because that's where we do all of our filtering and distribution and storage of all of our AIS data and other services that we provide. But it's very much minimized.
Thank you very much. I think that that's an important differentiation and an interesting concept that you've already presented last time, I believe, because it's one of your specific topics that you're using and how you're differentiating yourself also from different concepts. I would like to ask one question to all of these really important providers of information and data with a new kid on the block, which is just going into the commercial domain and trying to find its market, I understand. But I would like to ask all of you to see where do you already have or where do you see areas of cooperation with other providers, or do you at all see a necessity and a usefulness of it? Because it seems that you are getting more and more to global coverage, to a refresh rate of almost what you get with terrestrial AIS, although you will never replace terrestrial because there's the collision problem that you're having from the satellites. So where are the areas, the domains that you are seeking or already engaging in working with others?
Well, apart from
if
going
at
out,
all, yeah.
yes, apart from going outside and challenging my competitor, we do speak to each other. But realistically, in the marketplace, what has happened is not that we cooperate; the customers are making us cooperate. a lot of customers utilize as many AIS services as they can. Not only are they using AIS, they move to RadarSat, to SAR systems, they've moved to optical systems. The objective is to be able to identify ships accurately. And it doesn't seem to matter what system we have, it's not enough. So we don't see direct cooperation between companies, but we are seeing cooperation within companies that utilize the services, and that has become the norm today.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think I will echo exactly what George has said. From our perspective, it's all about the customer. There's no other way of looking at it. It's about the customer's needs in terms of what they're looking for them to be able to take themselves to the next level or to solve particular problems. The customers decide they need a whole variety of different services. That's their choice. What we need to do as providers is to respect that choice, work with our customers, provide them the data service that they're looking for, and help them along that particular path. George is completely right. It's not up to us at all.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I mean, although we have a lot of overlapping, funny enough for our customers, sometimes we are complementary to each other on a small part. I think the other way for cooperation would be typically on the regulatory spectrum. So I know there are some things going with VDES, and that's a typical area where you would cooperate as well. Yeah.
I would call it collaboration rather than cooperation, but it's only because collaboration, you're actively working with people. But you got cooperation right now. But I would like to point out something else. The WeatherDock Orbcom Halley thing that George mentioned earlier on, that orange box, you couldn't really tell the scale of how big it is. It's this size, except it's square. It's actually not quite this big, and it's really cool. I have a home in Peru, and well, I guess I'm giving away my 50s time, but really cool meant really nice. But yeah, the water's good too. Yeah, it's very good.
We have a question here from an addition from the academic world.
Yeah, the academic world is still present. And the academic world would like to see the commercial world present their results in a similar way as we did in this paper, where we analyzed actually all the satellite AIS data available in the world at that time, 2013, 2014. So it is, let's say, old stuff compared to what you have now. But we had Orbcom, we had Exact Look Space, we had Space Quest, and we had Norwegian data. European Commission bought or got for free all that data, and the results are published in that paper that I mentioned, where also the method is presented. So now seeing real constellations, because when you procure data from 4 providers, you don't get 4 times the quality, because most of those satellites are in similar orbits, launched as piggybacks. And that goes for Norwegian satellites as well. So when I show gaps of 10 hours, it's simply because there are no satellites there for those 10 hours at the equator or in the Atlantic. And then they come back, and when you have a real constellation like Iridium has, you have really the possibility to give the best service ever. And I would like to see that compared to those results with all the satellite AIs from 2014. If you could present that.
Just to follow on what you just said there, it's not just how many duplications do you have, where the uniqueness is. That's really what you're looking for. We did the same thing in the United States back when I was working for the government a couple times, and it's fascinating. But that's history today. With all of these different constellations that have gone up in the last 18 months, massive expansion of both Spire and Exact Earth, I would be very fascinated too, because it's changed. It's changing every day.
Yes, Torkel would be very happy to do that. So we'd be happy, as we talked about last evening, to supply data to the academic community for this very purpose. So.
Thank you. Carsten?
There is a good question from the audience. So why has satellite AIS never replaced terrestrial AIS? Or do you think it's going to happen?
Never.
Never.
And because, again, we have to remember the very reason AIS exists, collision avoidance and safety at sea. That's the entire reason the system exists. Satellite AIS is a complement to that capability. It doesn't replace it by any stretch. You may have areas of very isolated coastlines that can never have the infrastructure to put up an AIS terrestrial tower network. And in that case, satellite may act as a way of being able to provide you that type of coverage. But it will never, ever replace terrestrial AIS, and that would be not wise to suggest. Yeah. That's our view anyway.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But we had, when the satellite AIS was new at the beginning, and everybody thought we will have satellites and we never have to put up AIS antennas again. So 10 years later, it has a little bit changed.
Yeah.
So
I got beat up by the IMO. You know, you're screwing up my system.
And I would like to remind everybody of the Alfred's presentation that was actually going into the congestion also on the terrestrial side, where you only have a limited range and limited domains. So even there, the problem exists and has to be tackled. So the more it is, and was always there in space.
Yeah, I think Alfred's presentation put it in perspective that here we are using time divisional multiplexing, and for those people who aren't used to it, it's an old technology again from the 80s. I was involved in it. I go back a long way in high tech. And time divisional multiplexing is a slicing system. It gives you a piece of the pie. And when you go to space, we don't have any pieces of the pie. We get them all together, all at the same time.
That's why they told me it wouldn't work.
And unfortunately, when Carson said, you know, we thought, no, we didn't think. We knew we would never get to the point of comparing it to terrestrial. It just won't work that way. It's getting much better. But its greatest weakness is not how we receive it. Its greatest weakness is how it's transmitted to us and what it contains. And that's always been an issue. Panama Canal decided to make sure every ship that went through the Panama Canal had operating AIS devices. 16% of all ships, their AIS was not operating correctly. Antenna problems, power problems, wasn't working with GPS, etc. They insisted either they would be fixed or they loaned one from the Panama Canal Authority. It gives you an idea. 16% doesn't sound much, but that means that 84% are working and 16% are not. That's a lot of ships. And that's the issue with AIS.
Thank you very much. Carsten has another question.
So last question from the audience. It would be nice to have satellite AIS with less than 1 minute latency. What would this cost? And is it getting cheaper?
To those of you who want to know, Simon and myself are in the back. We'd be happy to chat with you during the break. Thank you for the question.
Okay, that's
If you got the money,
Okay.
I got the time.
so the general answer is a lot. Yeah.
So that would be more of a general question to Simon. And I was interested in your third pillar of your company, and that was about the weather prediction. And I wanted to know how accurate the prediction is, and if it's not that great yet, if you think it can or has real big potential to improve, because I can imagine that weather prediction is like the wet dreams of a lot of decision makers. And yeah, so I just wanted to know the answer.
Yeah, I think it will make a significant impact, particularly for those areas where you do not have a lot of fixed ground weather stations. So we have a lot of them in land. So the predictability in Germany and the Netherlands is pretty okay. But it's not okay on the oceans, neither for aircrafts or for vessels. The technology that we use exists since the 70s. It's being tested in NASA for many, many times. It works. The US administration never had the budget to commercialize anything. It's more actually NOAA, the US Weather Administration, is actually contracted Spire to develop this on a commercial base and basically do that now in demonstration phase. We reckon that accuracy of weather at oceans could be improved by a factor 10 to 50, relatively easy. So that's going to be a major change. Yeah.
So if there are no more questions, then Carsten, do you have any other one, or is that?
No, I think everybody is looking forward to hear the next session, and then also for the lunch.
Okay.
Or are there more questions?
No. Okay, then.
No.
Then thank you very much. I wonder if we should have. Gentlemen, thank you. Carsten.